I've already covered the Soviet legendary tier destroyer Khabarovsk many times on this channel, but there's finally something new to say about the ship. In the October 2024 update, the Khabarovsk, the Conqueror, and the Gearing all received the same buff. If you look at the Ministry of Balance article, it will tell you that the Khabarovsk's bow, stern, steering gear, and superstructure HP, all of them were reduced. Now, a reduction in HP probably sounds like a nerf at first blush, but what it means is that in these sections where the HP has been reduced, they will saturate quicker. Each ship has sections, such as the bow, stern, and superstructure, and all of these sections have their own HP pool. When they get hit by enemy shells, they take damage, and then the HP of that individual section goes down. When it goes down all the way, that means the section is saturated, so any subsequent hits to that part of the ship will do less damage, and thus the Khabarovsk is now tankier than it was before the update. So I thought to myself, what happens if we try to build into that buff a little bit? I've got Trubetskoy at the helm, and one of his inspirations is the Italian destroyer commander I don't see too many people talking about, Bergamini. Bergamini's base trait reduces the damage you take as you take more damage. So subsequent hits do a little bit less damage because of him as well. And Khabarovsk already, prior to the update, was one of, if not the tankiest destroyers in the entire game. It's got 22,500 HP at base, but that's also a little bit misleading because Trubetskoy's base skill reduces the amount of damage the destroyer takes too. So effectively, we probably have a little bit more HP than that, and if you wanted to pop Sims on there, for example, then you could get up to 25,000 HP. So we already had a large HP pool prior to the buff, one of the highest in the game for destroyers. Not the highest, though. I think Elbing probably has more HP than Khaba does. But we had that going for us, and then we had the Khabarovsk's unique armor gimmick. Along the side of the ship, and also in the front under the turrets, there are 50 millimeters of armor plating. Those 50 millimeter plates shatter all destroyer HE. They can even bounce high caliber battleship AP if you get the angle right and the shell lands just properly. We might actually have an example of that later on in this battle. So because of that 50 millimeter armor plating, Khabarovsk was already very tanky, and now it's tankier. And the way that you really play it sort of lends itself to not taking too much damage either. We'll see that as this game develops, but for now we were working with the Schultz on this cap. For whatever reason, Prinz Ruprecht decides to push straight into it. Bad idea, of course. He makes contact with two of our torpedoes, which is not something you really use every single game in the Khabarovsk. It only has a 6-kilometer range on the torpedoes. And to be fair, they do hit very hard, and they have the most ridiculous concealment of any regular torpedo in this game. I think it's 0.8 kilometer detectability. They're basically like deep water torps in terms of visibility. So you only see them when they're right in front of your face, and by then it's far too late to attempt to dodge them. So Prinz Ruprecht goes down. The cap, which was previously occupied by an enemy Shimakaze, who I think is right there sinking, is now clear, and so we'll be able to take it. We've also got a friendly Shimakaze of our own somewhere in this cap, and there's an enemy Ohio who's beached himself against the island over there to the right. We're going to be able to take the cap, and my thought was, well, let's go out here. Maybe if Ohio's going to push in, then we'll also get him with our torpedoes. They're pretty much reloaded now. And if he doesn't push in, we can continue past and push toward the enemy spawn for the Delta cap. That was the idea, but of course, Shimakaze has a little bit of a different idea. There he goes. You can see him sailing straight toward the Ohio. Obviously going in for the YOLO run, which, to be fair, I don't think is the best use of his resources, but, you know, it might work out. We'll continue to go forward then and let Shima go around the corner and spot the Ohio. If we get spotted, which we might because our concealment is terrible, it's 6.9 kilometers. No reason to build into it, of course. I like to build into the main gun range and the rudder shift because Khaba has a terrible rudder shift. But Shimakaze gets spotted by the Ohio, who is reversing himself off of the island. I think he's probably dead. Shima just needs to turn a little bit and get all the torpedoes on target. Seems to be holding it to the last minute here, though. He finally does turn, and I think he's going to get those torpedoes out, but of course he goes down in the process and trades his destroyer for a battleship. Pretty poor trade, in my opinion, but at least he sunk the Ohio, and now this side of the map is clear. So we've got Yamato out here retreating into the Delta Cap. And there is one more ship, too, that I don't think has been spotted yet. The rest of this game is going to basically demonstrate the way to play the Khabarovsk and also sort of demonstrate to you why it probably didn't need a buff to its ability to tank. We, of course, are built for as much range as we can have. Rumble is one of the inspirations. We use the range mod in the 4th slot. And then Trubetskoy's got this sort of forbidden evil skill. I can't remember what it's exactly called, but the icon looks like a little Zippo lighter. It extends the range of the guns, not quite as far as the sidestep skill when it's fully maxed on Anton Gurin or Rumble. With that sidestep skill and Rumble as inspiration, you can get these guns firing out to 15.4 kilometers. That requires you also use the range mod and the battle booster epic flag, the final form of it, because that gives you some extra range. So 15.4 kilometers there. I think with the Trubetskoy build, using the battle booster flag, the range mod, and then the fire starting range extending skill, we've got 14.8 kilometers, which is perfectly fine. Yamato is retreating, and because that skill on Trubetskoy gives us a 16% fire chance, well, we've become a flamethrower, and we're able to fulfill what I think is the most satisfying part of the Khabarovsk, and that is attacking enemy ships, specifically battleships, but also even cruisers, from maximum range, and just farming them down with the guns to light fires. Basically, what we're doing here is against the Geneva Convention. It's unambiguous torture of the poor Yamato. He's, sailing away. There's not too much he can do. He can try to shoot back at us, but we are a destroyer. We're a very large destroyer, to be fair, but relative to other ships, we're quite small. So it's difficult to hit this thing when it's going at full speed, which is over 40 knots, especially if you have the engine boost running. It's difficult to hit because of that speed. Also, it can turn out of the way. It can come to a stop, juke shells. That becomes easier the further away you are. So in these kind of scenarios, you've got no problem farming battleships and cruisers. And if they want to shoot back at you, they're going to have a problem hitting you. And of course, if they're shooting back at you, it means they are not shooting at your teammates. So in that way, you are evasion tanking for your team. One of the reasons I love the Khabarovsk and find it so satisfying to play. And now the ship count is fairly even, but the blue team has secured Charlie and Delta. We spawned with Alpha under our control, so the Reds only have Bravo. Now, we could go elsewhere on the map and try to deal with the final 2 enemy destroyers, but we are one ship on a team of 9, so we're going to continue on our way out here farming the Yamato. We've got another fire burning on him. That's 13 fires so far in this game because of that crazy Trubetskoy skill. And we've also attained the attention of Stalingrad out there, which is a pretty scary cruiser for most destroyers, but not necessarily Khabarovsk. One thing Stalingrad has going for it is it's got those Soviet ballistics, so it's quite easy to aim those guns at long range, even at smaller targets like Khabarovsk. Out of everything in this match on the red team, Stalingrad is probably the most threatening because he is almost certainly the one that can hit us most consistently. But even Stalingrad can get thrown off by a little throttle juking. There we only have 1 shell hit us, and it does 848 damage. which I think is a little bit of a reduction, possibly thanks to part of our ship being saturated, although I don't think it is. That might just be down to Trubetskoy's base skill and Bergamini's inspiration. But in any case, we're going to park here. We're going to go into reverse a little bit as Stalingrad continues to shoot. There he gets a couple of good hits on us, but it's with his HE. Doesn't matter so much. Stalingrad's HE isn't really the best in the game. And if he's going to continue firing, we can continue to do this throttle juking thing. There he almost totally misses us with the initial salvo and completely with the second. So once again, we're breaking the Geneva Convention here by torturing this poor cruiser. Practically every time we hit, a fire gets lit, and Stalingrad, even though he is a cruiser, he's got a shorter DCP cooldown than battleships. Fires lit one after another are still going to be a problem for him. And since we've got a couple lit and he's giving us a little bit of broadside, we can switch to the AP for perhaps some more consistent damage. There's over 3K right there, and, we'll get a couple other salvos like that, net ourselves the high caliber, continue to throttle juke as the Stalingrad returns fire, and continue to dodge the majority of his shells. We're behind the island now. We've got, I think, our friendly Schultz, who was with us from the beginning of the game, spotting the Stalingrad. That's kind of nice. Schultz also has torpedoes in the water, and because we're unspotted, we won't take any damage at all. But this kind of playstyle is what you do in the Khabarovsk. It's a long-range farmer with its guns. People try to play it differently. Doesn't work out too well. This is not something you want to take into close range and knife fight with other enemy destroyers like you could in, for example, the Gearing. The Gearing has a fast reload on its guns, faster than Khaba. It's also got floaty shells that are more difficult to land at long range, so you do want to be closer with it. But crucially, it's got a small turning circle and a fast rudder shift. Khaba has a gigantic turning circle and a terribly slow rudder shift, which is why I'm using double rudder mods on it instead of using the concealment mod at all. If you use the concealment mod, then this thing simply doesn't turn, so I like to build it for double rudder. But because of that terrible maneuverability, it means if you're in a knife fight with enemy destroyers, you're very vulnerable to torpedoes. So you play to your strengths, you play at range, and you're incredibly difficult to hit. So therefore, I don't think it needed a buff to its ability to tank, but it's got one. And, well, I do love the ship. It's very fun to play. It's one of my favorite in the game. We end this with 162,000 damage, not quite top on the leaderboard, because Michelangelo takes that place. But I hope you enjoyed the video, and maybe give Khabarovsk a spin if you haven't in a while. It is a little bit tankier now. I'm not sure how really noticeable it is, but all it can really do is help this ship be more effective. Give the video a thumbs up, consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.